All right, everybody, a special episode joined by a different guest. That's right. No, this isn't a Locked On crossover. It's somebody else. You might not have met him before. Baseball Twitter, like a fool like I am, then maybe you have. You know what I mean? Maybe you're just one of those insufferable people. On today's show, we are talking with Marc Delucchi about Giants, Padres, what they have in common, how the Giants did better than the Padres, obviously, this season, and many more things. Here we go, guys. Baseball's very good. Locked On Padres. Let's get it going.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. I messed up my intro already. What's going on? I am your host, as always, with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You might be familiar with some of my baseball work at places like Baseball FYI, Off the Bench Baseball, bunch of other places, and Just Baseball, where I'm a staff writer. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, that's JAVIIPENO, or the show account, which is Locked On Padres at LO_Padres. You can see me pointing to my name right now. And if you are seeing that, that means you're watching the YouTube. If you're not seeing that, that means you're listening to it. That's how that works. There you go, Mark. You're almost getting it.
I'm getting okay.
Yeah, you're almost getting it. It takes years of practice and stuff. So you guys can check that out in the description if you're an audio listener to Locked On Padres on YouTube. And you heard him just laugh a little bit there. Today's episode is a fun one. A different guest, not a Locked On host, which is usually what I go to when I'm just trying to put out content, because it's very easy to talk to them because they're my fellow workers. So they have to say yes. That's basically what I'm getting at here. What's going on? I'm being joined by...
It's true. I did not have to say yes.
Yeah, you did not have to say yes. He did, though. There were some other incentives on the side that we don't have to talk about, of course. But I'm being joined by Marc Delucchi, who you might have seen around the Twitter sphere and the baseball sphere. He's writes for SB Nation. He's done stuff for Around the Foghorn over at Fansided, which is the San Francisco Giants site. And in terms of SB Nation, he does stuff for Golden State of Mind and Niners Nation. I will let my brilliantly intelligent listeners figure out what they think those two sites cover. Mark, what's going on, man?
Not bad. Like you mentioned, Giants got eliminated, which was tough. But I'm right into the Niners and Warriors seasons now, so just trying to stay sane. There was that point where we had Warriors preseason, Niners regular season, and Giants playoffs. I'd obviously love for the Giants to still be playing, but my schedule did get a bit more flexible. So there's some positives with the negatives every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And again, guys, thank you for tuning in to Locked On Padres, making us your first listen every day. Available free on all platforms, like I just mentioned above. Look, man, I hate baseball. I'm going to come out of the gate. I hate the sport. It's a terrible sport. I don't know why I spent so much time covering it and talking about it. I just ended up in this situation, and now I'm miserable. If anybody's watching the YouTube, I am wearing my Slam Diego shirt. Funny story about this shirt. I did not choose this. Okay, it was gifted to me by my dad for my birthday this past summer. And my dad loves to do this thing where if he knows something I'm interested in but can't decide the specific one, he just buys it all. So he hears, you want Oreos? Like, I'm a big fan of like limited edition weird Oreo flavors.
Okay.
I haven't had them in a while because I have to eat healthy and all that now. But I was like, oh, these watermelon ones or whatever. And he bought like 5 cases of them. And I was like, okay. So that was a really fun winter break.
But I feel like there's 2 details of that story that like I want to parse out separately in separate podcasts. The first being the watermelon Oreos, and the second being 5 cases. I think both of those are worthy of their own, but because they're both there, we're just gonna move on and let both of them slide. But I just wanted to note both of those details.
No, I think they're very important. It's like an episode of like Dateline. What's that show called about like the deep late like weekday night show that comes on that has like
that's the Keith Morrison. Yeah, it's like it was a cold and crispy night.
But we're not talking about mergers and stuff today. We're talking about mergers in a different way. Actually, you could argue, which is about the Giants and stuff. And people might be wondering why I had you on the show. First of all, Marc is brilliant. Everybody check him out. He does all sorts of stuff, not just the stuff that I mentioned. He tweets a whole bunch of stuff. He tweets about movies occasionally. Not as in such a like cursed brainworms type of way that I do, but he does tweet about a whole bunch of things that I think you guys will enjoy.
Sure, I did subtle because sports Twitter and Ted Lasso are like too intertwined at this point, especially like sports writers, young sports journalism Twitter, and so but I trying to avoid spoilers and trying to not get sucked into that. I was doing very light, low tone Ted Lasso spoilers and reactions without saying Ted Lasso. So I just I was essentially subtweeting a TV show for but it'd be one tweet a week, and if you go back, it's Giants, 49ers, some political stuff, some Warriors, some whatever, and then it's just one tweet that doesn't fit. And if you know Ted Lasso, you know which episode I had just watched. That was kind of something that was happening for a bit.
Hey, that's how it goes sometimes. But we're not talking about Ted Lasso today. We are talking about the Giants.
We're not.
We're not. Yeah. I mean, we maybe. I'll try my best. Longtime listeners of the podcast know I am insufferable with pop culture references. I will find.
This is why you had me on the podcast, to just derail it in the first 5 minutes. You've been trying so hard to talk about Giants and Padres, and I've taken us on Ted Lasso, watermelon Oreos, 5 cases of them. I'm all over the place.
Job. That's the funny part. Usually I do that when I'm on another podcast.
I hope this episode title is just Super Chaos with Marc Delucchi.
Yeah. It'll be like error, file not found. But the reason I had you on was because back at the beginning of time, which we'll be talking about on today's episode, which is the similarities between our two teams. I mean, we are both obviously in the NL West. But what I thought was interesting is you invited me on your show a while ago, over at Around the Foghorn, which is FanSide's site for Giants coverage, of course. And we talked Padres and Giants stuff. Is coming off of because the Giants and Padres played twice early on in the season.
Yeah, it was. I think
never again.
I think it was after the first, heading into the second. Giants were in first place, but nobody cared. And I think it was Padres and Dodgers were still. I think Padres might be in second at that point, actually.
Probably, yeah.
And it's been, we had that conversation early. And in many ways, I think one of the last questions I asked you was if the Padres don't make the playoffs, what's the story? And you're like, what happens here? And you were like, well, the Giants end up being real and being real good, and the Padres pitching falls apart. And that kind of just went through my head then. And as the season went on, I was just like, geez, I really should have clipped that and just retweeted that every couple weeks. Probably would have done some good numbers for both you and I. But yeah, I've thought about that quite a bit, because as the season went on, a lot of what we talked about was every 5 seconds it's me going, I don't know if the Giants are this good, but they seem to be. So far they've been playing pretty good, so we'll pocket that. And just seeing how these two teams went has been really interesting, because in many ways it's opposite, right? Had the Giants started strong and faded and ended up where the Padres were, no one would have gotten fired. No one would have really been. I mean, there would have been. Obviously, Giants fans would be upset. Fans are always upset when you start well and poorly, as they should be. I'm not criticizing that, but that wouldn't have been a big deal. The Padres do what they do this season. They're upset they didn't beat the Dodgers, but they get to Game 5 in the LDS and win 107 games. They feel great. And it's just so ironic how both these teams, if you flip their standing, neither fan base is really upset. Obviously, the Padres, why would they be upset? They would be, but the Giants, it would still feel like, okay, they're still on the trajectory. They need to spend this offseason. They need to, I think there'd be a lot more pressure on the Giants to spend than there's going to be, for better or worse. But that would be different. But otherwise, I think both fan bases feel pretty okay. And then on the flip side, now Giants fans are like, all right, we got Farhan Zaidi is God now in San Francisco, and it really around baseball. And again, he's done a lot of great moves. We can parse that if we want to go in that direction, because I have a bit more of mixed. Again, I think Zaidi's been great as team president, but I think there are some questions still sort of out there about the Giants team going forward. But then on the flip side, Padres, it's been, it does seem like everything is falling apart despite having this huge star power. And you kind of worry if the Padres could end up going the way, I hate to bring it up, but going the way of the Angels, right? Where you have these incredible talents like Trout and Ohtani, but the pitching just never is able to come together. And then you end up sort of chasing your tail for a number of years. Because, building a good team isn't I think front offices make it the hardest thing in the world, but ultimately, no matter what system you come up with, as long as you have an equal number of teams who all have to play each other, someone's going to finish lower in the standings, and someone's going to finish below 500 if someone's finishing above 500. And you have the Dodgers who aren't going anywhere. I don't know about the Giants. I mean, I don't think the Giants are going anywhere per se, but I think there's next year's preseason is going to be really interesting because Giants fans this year were like, everyone was picking them to suck, and then all Giants fans were like, yeah, Farhan needs to be fired, and now they're good. And so next year, we're probably going to have a bunch of pundits who are split, where some build off this year, others expect them to regress, and then all the people that predict the Giants to regress are like Giants fans. By midseason, Giants fans had flipped. It had gone from Farhan sucks to all these reporters hate us. Small market San Francisco never gets any attention. I mean, granted, there was some like obnoxious. I know the Dodgers ended up being the Giants, but it was great when it was like Dodgers best team baseball still in second. It's like, guys, I mean, look, I like that too. Yeah, like if you want to say, like, look, the thing is, like, you have such an easy cop out. If you say most talented, we could debate that, and like Giants fans would still get us. But that when you couldn't prove that wrong, best team, they're 2 games back, or I mean, they ended up winning. It was an absurd thing where. Because no one knew what to make of the Giants. I didn't, and I was following them closely. No one knew what to make of them. And that's going to make them just the absolute demon for so many people having to prognosticate next season. Because this season's team was not that different than last season's team. That was a 500 team and would have barely missed the expanded playoffs. And it's probably, I hope I'm wrong. I hope Farhan Zaidi and Charles Johnson open up that checkbook and they come into next year with Marcus Stroman and Kevin Gossman's come back and they re-sign Kris Bryant. Maybe, they bring in another Nick Castellanos or, I'm just naming names. But I don't think next year's team is going to look a lot different from this year's team, which also won 107 games and last year won 29 out of 60. And, there's been turnover. Lamont Wade obviously comes in, but it's like, there's not, it's going to be fascinating. And again, as someone who's going to have to make predictions and make bold picks, it's going to be really interesting because Farhan Zaidi loves making moves. I remember there's one MLB front office person when the Giants had hired him. He'd been there a year, and he was talking about he'd worked with Zaidi pretty closely previously, and he talked about he was sort of going through different people he's worked with. And he's like, this guy likes doing this, and Farhan just loves that circle of the waiver wire and making moves and trying to make it's just like I mean, Farhan has become like what Jerry DiPoto dreamt of being, like making. And to be fair, Seattle actually proves I shouldn't necessarily knock that too much, but he's done that. But that also means like you have no idea what this roster is going to look like in June of next year.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And as you guys can tell, Mr. Delucci he's the juggernaut. Once he gets going, no object can stand in his way. You know what I mean? So I'm going to try my best to take just a quick break, guys, before we continue talking about the Giants and the spending thing, which is what I wanted to talk to you about specifically because you made a great point when we first chatted back in whenever the April, May, whatever it was. Before we get into that, though, guys, this episode is brought to you by, from Mark's Madness, Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure these questions, EX, LX? I don't even know what that means. I don't know anything.
I don't. Yeah.
So see, Mark doesn't know.
I don't know. Rock Auto sounds good to me.
Don't worry about it, man, because we all have computers. We've got phones in our pockets and at home, and you can go to Rock Auto, save time and money, which is the biggest, most important thing. Obviously, you can save, 30, 50, even 100% more on all your purchases. For example, Honda Odyssey fuel pump costs $353 from chain stores. Well, it's only $216 from Rock Auto. Pretty good, right?
That's a good deal. It's a good deal. That's
a good deal. And on top of that, they've got a really easy to use catalog, really easy to navigate, and they have everything you can need from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So what in the world are you waiting for? Everyone needs car stuff. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there. How'd you hear about us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Again, guys, thanks for making Locked On Padres your first listen, #first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms,
baby. Farming content.
Phil. You remember Farmville?
I
That was
do
a good
remember
game.
Farmville. I didn't play.
That was co-term for a little bit.
The one that was huge in my middle school was it was what was the the university one? It was like you built your own college and stuff, and since it was like me and like
Oh, I
sports
think I know
friends,
what you're talking
we
about.
we
That
all
was probably
juiced
after
up
my
those
time.
facilities,
Mm,
juiced up those
that was after
facilities,
my time.
and then there was a brief time where there was a sports bar, and that was huge among the bros who apparently wanted to like own a bar. Apparently that was the vision we all had. It's like upgrade. We're gonna buy another TV to air football. It was such an absurd game. It didn't last very long. I don't think it had much traction outside of like 12 people, and maybe just at my school.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like Fun Run was a game for us. But anyway, before we get into that, speaking of spending money on resources and stuff, that's a big thing I wanted to talk to you, Mark, is because you made a point back when back when I was on your show, right? And the point that you made was you were interested in the idea that the Padres are spending all this money, right? They became all of a sudden the big market Padres. Everybody's been joking about that. The big market Padres taking advantage of the small market Yankees and all these teams, right? That was kind of the big bit and joke going around for a while. And then you brought up the idea where it was like, I wonder if this is going to translate into coaching, into pitching coaching, into player development and all this stuff.
To training staff.
The point. Yeah, into the training staff. And I think it's very interesting because we saw this year, I mean, the Padres fired Larry Rothschild with like 4 weeks to go left in the season. They fired Jace Tingler. Everybody's freaking out. You have the Athletic piece that drops talking about how player development's a mess. AJ Preller it wasn't as much of a hit piece on him as, say, the one for the Rockies with Jeff Bridrich was, where everyone was like, yeah, this guy is really
We have
bad.
no idea what he's doing. Yep.
Yeah, the Preller one was like, there's a lot of problems here, but then there were some people who defended him and stuff, which I thought was
it feels like I mean Preller does seem. I mean, he is sorry.
No, go for it. I love this. Let's do it.
To me, this is the Marc Delucchi Locked On Padres podcast. To me, Preller is in that like Dipoto realm, and I say like part of the reason I have trepidation on Zaidi is I don't know. I think Zaidi. I have a hope, and I think he sees himself in sort of a different vision than someone like Dipoto or Preller, and even I think to a certain extent, although he's not quite as extreme, Andrew Friedman, where they embrace the marginalism economics to the extreme that has come with sort of the post Moneyball era of like front office person out of Harvard economics and AI generated models.
Yeah, kids who walk into the room with their Princeton shirts,
right?
Yeah,
and I was talking to one of my friends from college who had like just got a new haircut and had like the white like Scout at a game polo, and I was like, he doesn't know anything about sports. I was like, you have no idea what this means, but you look exactly like an MLB front office executive right now. But anyway, you can guess what race he is, by the way, just from that for all the listeners out there. But anyway, when you see like Dipoto and Preller, they are people who a lot of people in baseball hate their guts. There was a minor league game I went to, and there were several scouts from around baseball there. All of them had been at some point fired by Jerry Dipoto at his various stops. And I think Preller is someone who, again, to a certain extent, they both love making moves. They both like doing a lot of things on the margins. But I think but with the underrated part of how a lot of front office executives work their way up is they find ways to cut costs for teams, right? They say, look, you're spending $1 million on the scouting department. I can do the same thing for $350,000 if we get one analyst in here and a good server system, right? And so what's under the cover of a lot of these new age things are just cutting costs, right? That's what the Astros are the extreme of, right? And I think that built a lot of other problematic cultures that we saw come out, whether it's the cheating or Brandon Taubman or all these other things, or training for Roberto Ozuna. And so I think Preller kind of falls in that case. And that was my read from the Athletic article too, is the people who defended him were saying his methods can work. Like what he's doing is good baseball. But what these people often miss is the people part of it. That one, you're burning a lot of bridges, and two, that ultimately what you're doing isn't necessarily making anything better. It's perhaps keeping it the same at less price, which does nothing for anyone but ownership and maybe your relationship with ownership. And I think that is my concern for Zaidi in the same way, is that the Giants have been this big market thing. They should well be outspending the Padres. But I wonder if part of the reason the Giants made the switch they did when they hire him is they hope he could bring the same levels of success at less cost, which again does nothing for anyone but ownership. Like I don't like people like to talk about the Tampa Bay Rays, and yes, they're very good at building a winning baseball team. But I don't like this was the mistake of Moneyball, right? This is what if I could go.
Oh. No,
this is what Michael Lewis
I've been
did
saying
wrong.
this for so long. Yes, thank you. Go.
Like this is what Michael Lewis did with Moneyball. Is he wrote a cool story about how businesses could make more money. Mm-hmm. That's all Moneyball is about. And again, look, I read Moneyball. I watched Moneyball. Like it was a huge part of forming, my passion for baseball and forming what I am today. But we have to reevaluate sort of fans. You shouldn't care about luxury tax.
Yeah.
You shouldn't care you shouldn't even care if your owner makes money. Mm-hmm. Obviously, your owner's going to try to make money. Look, if every fan base said, we want our owner to lose $100 million a year, that owner is still not going to lose $100 million a year. That owner will make sure he makes money. He is looking, like, you don't need to look out for him. And so it's, anyway, I'm curious to see because Zaidi has emphasized people and sort of, being like, I don't want to cut here. I think he has with what the Giants have done. And again, to be fair to Friedman, the Dodgers have done similar things to this where they've, expanded obviously in a lot of sort of the traditional ways of metrics, but the Giants had the biggest coaching staff in baseball, right? The Giants have invested in expanding their player development staffs. And that was something before Zaidi, but Zaidi's continued it. So, we've seen that investment everywhere, and that's something I think more organizations could benefit from doing. And that's something I was skeptical with the Padres. And from the Athletic piece, that tells me Preller is not doing that. Preller has specific things he wants to invest in that he believes in, but everything else he is willing to cut costs to sort of justify that and make that work. And I think we've seen some of those issues. And one that's going to burn a lot of bridges, that's going to ruin some relationships, but that's also going to make your organization really reliant on a fewer number of people, right? Yes. And we all know about anything, whether we were in a club in school, whether we worked a job at a company, the fewer people you're relying on can work great if those few people are really good. Yep. And it can work terribly if any one of those people aren't, right? And I think that's something where the Padres are, we've seen kind of dealing with that. Now that they're cleaning house, Preller's really going to need to nail a lot of these hires.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a connection to the Padres team. They trade, what is it, like 31 players for 9 guys.
Yep.
What you're basically mentioning, where is it just...
That's a good point, yeah.
Is this just a sport where, one of my takeaways from this series, we have to remember that it's baseball, and that, is this just a sport where you want to get those 4 studs, and there's a bunch of guys who will be good against one team? You know what I mean? Like, is that how deep the numbers go? Is it that you're like, we're going to pick up Davies because we know he'll be amazing against the 5 teams that we're playing in the second half for night games, whatever, right? Like, is that the way to build that intricately? Then you get your Tatis and your Machado and your Cronenworth and vice versa. For the Giants, maybe that's this offseason. It's, I don't know, Corey Seager, who made an awesome mistake in the infield at the time we're recording today. We're recording on a Tuesday. This is releasing on a Thursday. That was phenomenal. Currently, while we're recording, it's 5-2. I've been glancing over a little bit every now and then. So you have that, but I've been saying the same thing, and I'll be a much less educated and intellectual way about the Rays and how I think we have these teams that we take the wrong things for Moneyball, right? And Moneyball, the movie, like, it's got that Sorkin writing. I'm a Sorkin fan. He's just a great dramatist, right? And he does all these things.
If you accept, like some things are going to be a bit distorted, but it can be enjoyable to watch, right?
Mm-hmm. It's very good. I think he sometimes gets a little bit more hate for certain things. Some things, no, I understand it, and I don't think he's, not to go down the rabbit hole of politics and all that. I think some things there is a need for his thing. And then currently in the year 2021, I'm like, I don't want to think this kumbaya way, for lack of a better word. But
he was really great. Like, if we could put his stuff in 1980.
Yeah, I would say
maybe we can move beyond. Yeah.
And then just in terms of people, I think that the writing and whatnot. But before we get into that, too much, I guess we could say that we'll have to do that for the movie podcast. But like, I think teams look at Tampa and they look at, the thing I will say about Tampa is that at least Tampa, it works lowercase w. I know they haven't won a World Series, which is what I've been making fun of them for. Where I'm like, everyone loves to say the Rays are the most lovely organization. They run it so well. Right. Look at them. They're always there. I'm like, win a World Series first, then we could talk a little bit more. Oh, well, look at the Dodgers. They're so incredible. I remember preseason when people were talking all this shit, right? They're like, oh, wow, the Padres made all these moves just to lose to the Dodgers in 5 games. I'm like, that could happen. The Dodgers are still better, in my opinion. Keep in mind, this is back in April. But I was like, what has given you the confidence over Howie Kendrick, who's beating them in the playoffs, right? And Cardinals teams year in, year out. And we're like, oh, 60-game season, that's good now. I think that the Rays are a little bit of an what's a word? An outlier in this, where I think that we look at the Rays, but then you look at Cleveland, then you look at Oakland, then you look at Cincinnati, where they do the not spend money on their team thing, except it actually doesn't produce results. The Cleveland going soon to be Guardians, which I think rules, by the way. I don't know about you. I thought that name was just awesome.
I'm cool with it. I'm pretty indifferent. My dad, since he's, born, and he's like, Cleveland rocks would be cool because rock and roll in the museum. I was like, that sounds terrible.
The Cleveland
rocks. I'm like, that sounds terrible.
I just thought the Patrick Star thing. All right, Rocky, you can move whatever you want.
Yeah, but Cleveland rocks is like, it could be a rock and a guitar. I'm like, that's terrible, Dad. Don't go. Thankfully, he wasn't in marketing, but nonetheless, yeah, I'm cool. But anyway, Pittsburgh Pirates are another team, right? That
100%.
It's just atrocious.
It's just like Cleveland literally made the World Series, and I swear on my life, I know I'm a little bit of a weirdo and I don't remember things as much, but like I swear all they've done is progressively sell and trade off more and more players since they were literally. There's a bunch of these issues where I think, yes, you do praise the fact that, hey, and also I'm a big fan of the Rays fans. They're lovely, kind people in my experience. They are not mean. They are just like, hey, we traded for
there's only
dude.
Okay, but you got it. There's only like 3 of them. Okay, anyone who pays any attention to them.
Be mean.
I mean, don't look? I haven't interacted with the Rays fans, so maybe now I'm making enemies with the state of Florida's huge pro baseball. Anyway, sorry, I don't know why I'm taking pot shots at the Rays fan base.
Before we take more shots at more people, because I have a feeling that's going to come up for sure, guys.
What?
Let me talk to you about betting. That's right, guys. Everybody loves talking about betting. We're back and better than ever, not just for football, but for basketball. That's right. A new web interface for the start of the basketball season and more props, odds, and lines than ever before over at Bet Online, your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Remember to use the promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. But of course, aside from basketball and football, you're listening to a baseball podcast. They also cover baseball. They also cover hockey and boxing and UFC. And probably, when the heck are the Oscars? No, much longer from that. We're in Oscar season, and we're going to have the I don't want to go down that route. I hate the Oscars. Anyway, Bet Online is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports, guys. Whatever it is, future stuff, they're available. Go check it out. Bet Online, where the game starts. Mark, oh man, I have to catch myself every now and then before I get mad at the Oscars, man. God.
Welcome back to Locked On Movies Podcast. I'm your host.
Movies Podcast. But like, I think this is a great point. That's what I've been saying for so long. Is I do think we take the wrong lessons from Moneyball. There are good lessons to learn from that movie. Some from the book as well, which I have not read. But I think there are things to take away from that.
The funny part of the book is reading it back. There's this, one of the big things is about the draft, because the A's, since they've lost all those free agents, right, Giambi and whatnot, in the old system, when, again, it blows my mind that teams didn't figure out how a type A free agent used to get you the other team's first round pick and a supplemental first round pick, and there's no limits on cap. Anyway, teams missed. If there was one team that figured out if we just spent like $15 million in signing bonuses on one draft, we'd be like set. Like we could just make that recurring. Anyway, but one of the things, they had 7 picks in the first 2 rounds. They didn't have enough money to spend full slot, so they needed to sign under slot guys. And it's like when you read it back, because this was only a couple years after the draft, a lot of the guys they were like passing. It's like they found Mark Tehan.
Yeah.
And like they found, and it's like the one guy who ends up turning out to be great is Nick Swisher, but Nick Swisher was a consensus pick. Like that wasn't even a surprise. Anyway, it's like the year before they'd take Jeremy Bonderman, who was a high school pitcher, and they shouldn't have done that. And he's like Prince Fielder, the one guy who was too fat for Billy Beane. Well, that guy would have been a great pick. But anyway, but yeah,
go ahead. I think that there are things about it that Like, I mean, the movie obviously Isran has, and it does leave out, and I think it's the most obvious thing. It leaves out what's his face. Hold on, I'm forgetting the guy who literally wins the MVP for that team that year, who's just not mentioned at all in the movie, which is hilarious.
At all.
Who was it? I'm forgetting what his
Miguel
name is.
Tejada, right?
Miguel Tejada.
Right, he left the year. He might have left the year before. But yeah, there's a lot of players. I mean, basically the entire offense is not Scott Hatteberg. Gets ignored. Yeah, and Moneyball. What Moneyball is, right, is like really interesting for someone who wants to like think about baseball, to work in baseball, right? And and because sports is such a big deal, so many people want to work in it. Kids grow up, they want to play. Then they realize they can't play. They want to coach or be a GM. And I think what Moneyball does is it's the transition of sports fans growing who can't play wanting to be a coach to growing up a GM. That's kind of the cult shift that happens. But when you truly step back and think about it, Moneyball is a book, like, let's make it about a different industry. It's a book about how a car manufacturer on a lower budget figured out how to make as good a car as one of the big five, let's just say, right? Ford, and, Toyota, whatever. It found out a lower budget. What happened with Moneyball is the equivalent of me, a car consumer, wanting, because I've read this book about making a car cheaper that's as good, wanting and getting upset at people who say Ford and those other companies are spending too much money. Like, they need to spend less money, be more efficient. Like this, you shouldn't care if your price is the same, right? The price of admission is the same for most of the
in
age
baseball
that they
too. By the way, that's a good thing to preface. Is that like in some other sports, there's a much harder cap.
Yeah.
So that's like creates a whole thing where there should be caps and whatnot.
Yeah,
but in general, football, it's like that's part of the strategy where people
there's
are
an
like,
allocation issue here.
This is more like, oh, can we just do it for less, right? And then that's one of the things with baseball where I do, like I said, I worry about that, and I'm wondering, with just to tie a bow on it, whether or not the Padres were praised for how much money they spent, and I think rightfully so to a degree. Because keep in mind, this is not the Yankees. This is not some of those other teams. It's not even the Giants, right? Where like they genuinely, it's like it's a start. Now we have to see. I talked about on a previous episode where like this money and on the investment and all that. You saw, they got a lot of praise for when the pandemic first started, that they paid for their staff and whatnot all the way through October. But then minor league stuff, they did not have nearly as much as your team in terms of certain things. I don't have it in front of me right now, but like that's one area. And now, of course, we got that news earlier this week, of course. But in general, I'm very curious to see. I'm curious to see who they hire as their manager. I know you guys are killing it right now, but I'm wondering, that is a great question, right? Is this going to, and you put out a tweet earlier today kind of stressing this, where it's like, are they going to re-sign Bryant? We have to see whether or not this is going to be one of those things where they use the excuse of their team doing well as a sort of excuse to not spend more. And that's what keeps happening in baseball. And Mariners might do the same thing. You know what I mean? They might be like, well, look at us. We were right there, guys. It's like, well, was it a little fluky? A little bit. It was fun as hell. I will say that was a good team. I'm not saying they're not a good team, but are you going to be able to replicate that?
And why not make it better?
I often find. And why not make it better, right? So
why not?
One of my takes always in baseball has been, I don't think that the money is what annoys me about baseball for contracts. I'm always just like, I wish this was like the NBA, where Tatis only signs for 5 years, and then we're having a friggin' NBA or MLB roundtable just freaking out about where he's going to go, whether or not he's going to stay. Well, I wish the money could be the same. I know that there's so many different layers to why that can't exactly happen, but in an ideal world, I wish that we stopped the 14-year contracts. It's just me. I don't know. I think that's
like them.
It's awesome. As a sports fan, I don't think it's as fun.
Well, here's the thing about it is it does limit sort of like the excitement around player movement. The one thing though for me, and this is I guess start by talking about the Giants point you're talking about with Zaidi, is that Brian Sabean, Bobby Evans ran this team. Evans was the assistant GM for years next to Sabean for pretty much most of the 21st century, early part of the first dynasty's win 3 World Series. Sabean kind of steps away, takes a less prominent role, and so Evans becomes either GM or president, but essentially the top baseball ops guy, and then sort of is phased out, and they hire Zaidi to be team president. And when this happens, people, again, Zaidi made sense. He would have been my top target too, given connections to the Dodgers, connections to the A's. I mean, it wasn't. But the one thing that has happened over the last couple of years is principal owner of the Giants, Charles Johnson, has made the news for a lot of just Google Charles Johnson political donations and have some fun thinking about that if you're a Giants fan. But he's also taken a more prominent role in the organization. Rob Dean has become, who's a well-connected business partner with Charles Johnson, has taken a more prominent role on the business side of things. His son has taken a more prominent role. And so when that hire is made, there's two things that cross my mind. One is, sure, Zaidi win with the Dodgers, right? Andrew Friedman took the Rays way to the big market of the Dodgers, and look at the success it's had. Is my concern at the time, though, was, are they hiring Zaidi to, because people would say, now they're going to have a guy who's going to spend money more efficiently, and it's going to help the Giants be better. And my question is, was it about hiring Zaidi so he could spend the same amount of money and win even more games? Or was it about hiring Zaidi so they could win the same amount of games at less money? Which, again, gets back to the point we've kind of circled back to multiple times this year, where, look, I don't care if they win 85 games with a $2 million payroll or a $200 million payroll. And so for me, since I like players more than I like owners, I want that to be as high as possible, just on principle. And so, that this question is now becoming more prominent in Giants world, because the first 2 years the Giants had the excuse, well, we're still retooling. We have all these proven vets under contract. We don't want to. Yeah. Now those proven vets contracts are coming up. They've already extended Brandon Crawford. They'll surely accept the team option on Buster Posey, if not work out an extension, which it seems like they're going to do. But, Kevin Gossman's a free agent. He's going to be a premium starting pitcher. If they let him go, then they're going to need to sign someone else. Anthony DeSclafani pitched well enough to probably get a 3-year, $50 million, $40 million range. That's not a lot, but that's not nothing. And so,
yeah, I don't know if I have a feeling they won't do that, though.
I have a feeling they're going to offer. If I were in charge, and I'm not sure if they will, but I'd offer him a qualifying offer. And that what that could do is just tank his market to the point that he accepts it. It wouldn't shock me, because I could understand, like, it seemed like the Padres going, hey, Anthony DeSclafani for 3 years, $45 million would be pretty good value. But it doesn't seem like the Padres willing to do that and give up the draft capital for Anthony DeSclafani. I don't know. But anyway, they trade for Kris Bryant. Are they going to re-sign Kris Bryant? And so I'm seeing the Giants fans sort of fall into this like reactive habit about the Giants just won 107 games. You can't question them. And I made the tweet yesterday's idea in his press conference about Buster Posey's top priority. So that's how we know they're going to sign him to an extension, if not just accept the team option. But he talks about with Kris Bryant, he goes, look, he's going to have a lot of suitors, and again, it's nothing, Scott Boras is Bryant's agent. It's not out of the question. You maybe don't want to give him extra leverage. They could go and re-sign Kris Bryant for 6 years, 120, 150, whatever $1 million. Mm-hmm. But I tweeted a response to it, and it was sort of like, this is the concern with the Giants, is that if they are content winning with, players like Lamont Wade keep sort of winning on the margins, one, I don't think that's as sustainable. Like, he's had an incredible hit rate of finding guys, whether it's Mike Yastrzemski to Lamont Wade to all these players who he's essentially the Giants acquired for nothing or very little. But that's not as successful. Like, that's not as sustainable, right? Like, you are always better betting on a Kris Bryant than you are trying to find another Lamont Wade. Like, that's not rocket science. And the other thing is, again, we're starting to get to the point where you just won 107 games. You don't have the excuse of we're trying to retool now. You should be spending at least $180, $190 million a year in payroll, which is what the Giants did under Evans and in the last year of Evans and Sabian's tenures. And so this is going to be kind of that moment of truth. And I think the Padres fans should be interested in this, because if the Giants don't spend, that's a huge win for the Padres. Because
that's what I was going to finish up with.
that's huge, because now, like, even the Dodgers, relative to other organizations, I'm not going to criticize their spending, but even they have held back. Not too long ago, they were running 200, 220 with luxury tax, $250 million payrolls not too long ago. They're now sitting right on that luxury tax. Like, all of a sudden, that luxury tax number has become really important to teams because it's an easy way to save money. And ownership, I think, has realized that while the union hasn't agreed to a salary cap, if all of them just kind of quietly agree to treat it like a salary cap, then they're in heaven, because then they haven't had to concede any of the things that a union would normally get to get a salary cap, and they can just pretend it's there. And again, that's where I want to be critical of fans, and especially media, to be fair, that it fuels a lot of this, is I think we shouldn't be as focused on the luxury tax line as other sports are on the salary cap, because they're different things. Luxury tax isn't a limitation. on teams in the same way salary caps literally are. You cannot sign certain contracts in other leagues because of the collectively bargained agreement. That is not the case in baseball.
Absolutely. That's very well said, sir. Before we kind of wrap this up, one final thing, just one quick immediate thing. So that way, the aggregators and whatnot, it's your take. If I can cold takes expose you if it doesn't happen or what have you. Who are the Giants signing? What's the big splash that they make in free agency, if anything?
Wow. I think Bryant, heading into the offseason, I thought he was 60-40, 75-25 going to stay. After yesterday's comments, I know it's all reading tea leaves at this point. I'd say that's probably about 50-50, maybe even 45-55 at this point that he ends up elsewhere. One thing for Bryant is I don't think he's going to have as great a market as he expects. I think Boris is going to try to get Anthony Rendon money. And
I don't think
Bryant,
so either, honestly.
And so I think he might, and I think he likes San Francisco, so I think he might end up staying, but on a lesser deal than expected. Like in the, rather than, I think he's going to shoot for that like $200 million Anthony Rendon. I don't think anyone's going to give him that. I think there might be some teams that offer him in the 140, 150, like George Springer range. And I think that might be end up maybe 135, 6 years, about where he signs with the Giants, if he resigns. But I think, you look at the offense, they have the excuse. There's not a lot of holes to fill offensively. They could walk into next year and pretty much at catcher, you got Posey. At first base,
you got Lamont Wade and all those guys going to be the same thing? That's the whole question, right?
Like, I don't know, but I'm saying is they can justify it, right? The question is, honestly, there's a lot of
guys that would have to regress. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The question is whether they can justify it, because I don't know the internal conversations about what they're trying to do. And the other thing is the Giants are perfectly made for consolidation trades. Like I've been waiting for the trade where the Giants trade proven outfield talent to get a starting pitcher from the Marlins for 3 years. I've been calling it for 3 years because the Giants have 17.
I think every team's trying to do that right now, by the way.
But
I have a feeling.
But the thing is, the Giants have things that other teams don't, and that they truly do have a surplus in the outfield in in both the upper minor leagues, the lower minor leagues, and the major league level. Like if Mike Yastrzemski has 2 more years at the minimum, years of arbitration, team control left. The Giants could, especially if you re-sign Bryant, pretty much slot Bryant in for Yastrzemski in a heartbeat. And that's probably a better, more proven outfielder than most other teams are going to put out there without needing like a super huge return. Like, is Mike Yastrzemski and I'm just going to name a Giants prospect, Diego Rincones or someone like that, is that enough to move the needle for the Padres on maybe not necessarily Pablo Lopez or Sandy Alcantara, but maybe, a combination like Braxton Garrett and McNair? Again, I don't know who the Giants would prefer. But so it's going to, I think, depend on what those trades look like, because the Giants, right, Logan Webb now looks like an ace out of nowhere. But outside of him, every other starter in the rotation is a free agent. So they have 4 rotation spots they need to fill. And so it depends what those trades look like. Like if they're able to pull off a trade for a premium start, if they do this year's Blake Snell or this year's Darvish deal, then they don't need to sign a premium starting pitcher. Again, I love Marcus Stroman. He also won't cost a draft pick. So it's like, to me, I would be all over that. I'd be trying to re-sign Kevin Gossman, bring him back. And then because again, they have the money. If you could walk into next year with Logan Webb, Kevin Gossman, and Marcus Stroman as your top 3, that's just 3 really really good starters. And
they might not make the headlines all the time. There might not be like Corbin Burns 15 strikeout 1 hit performance, but it's kind of like, I think that what I'm interested in is, say, like a rotation like Houston's, where it was literally just a bunch of guys who, in the very technical term of just quality start, will go 6 innings, only give up 3, and the offense will do the rest. That's kind of what the Astros did this year. Now it's hurting them a little bit. Hopefully not, because Boston sports is a scourge on this planet. But I think we're gonna have to see that, And go ahead.
So I think but also I think Webb's shown an upside that I think is legitimate ace caliber. Gossman kind of comes in and out of that, depending on how his feel for his split is. So, I think it's probably going to come on starting pitching. Corey Seager, I thought for a while made a lot of sense. Now that Longoria's played the way he has and Crawford's locked in at shortstop, maybe they sound to play second base. But I think one that would be.
I'd be careful about Longo. I'd be careful about that one.
Look, I don't necessarily
this before is what I'm saying, but yeah, I know.
True, but
this is an Eric Hosmer level of he's going to be every other year, but it's certainly there's at least a reason.
I'm on the Longo train, but yeah, no, I understand. I mean, the one thing is if they let Kris Bryant walk, I would not be shocked if they make a run at Chris Taylor because he kind of does a lot of similar things and will probably less costly. And Zaidi came from the Dodgers, right? Like right-handed platoon guy who they can kind of slot into center field and move around. But yeah, I think it's probably got to come on starting pitching. But I'm honestly very curious because I think there's a chance that the Giants walk into next season having not spent more than $50 million on any free agent signing. I don't think it's out of the question that they let Gausman walk, re-sign DeSclafani, or re-sign Alex Wood, and do another piecemeal rotation, and they walk in next year, and sure, they could win 107 games again, but that would be really disheartening for me as a fan because that says to me, okay, this is a team that is not committed to, like, they're committed to being good and not being a top spender. That is like their commitment. They're prioritizing not spending over winning. Where, again, my tweet was about Bryant, and a lot of Giants fans are like, well, there's reasons. Yeah, if they let Bryant walk, but sign Marcus Stroman or sign, one of the, Corey Seager or whatever. Yeah, I don't, But the question is whether they're going to spend at all, not who it's on for me. Because I think there are so many ways it could go because they have so much flexibility on this roster, right? That you can move so many guys around. It's going to come down to, I think, it's the question of if they spend, not who they spend it on, I guess is my answer.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that has been the history of the San Francisco Giants, brought to you by Mr. Marc Delucci.
First, Christy Mathewson threw a no-hit.
Before we wrap this up officially, what do you got? What do you have to plug? I have your Twitter if people are watching the YouTube already in there, but what do you have to plug and what are you working on?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, if you're a Bay Area sports fan, I think that's my lead demo, my lead market. Like as Javi mentioned, I cover the 49ers for Niners Nation. I cover the Golden State Warriors for Golden State of Mind. I'm leaving around the Foghorn now, but I'm still going to be covering the Giants all around. So, Giants, pretty much 3 pro sports. I mentioned you might get some subtweets of TV shows I'm watching. You might get you actually definitely will get some political stuff in there. Again, I'm interested in the intersections of sort of how essentially the social sciences interact with sports, right? When we're talking about Moneyball and all this stuff, I'm gonna go on for another hour and a half about this hobby. So I think sports get you hooked by the game itself, but I think at a certain point, if you dive into it, I've always made the point, you could learn every subject through school through a sports-centered curriculum, and I think that'd be a way to anyway. But I think there's just so many interesting things that we see coming on. Whether we're talking about the dynamics of labor, which is going to be a huge part of this offseason with the collective bargaining agreement coming up. Look, I'm just saying it's going to be a lot of interesting things are going to be happening in baseball and beyond, and I'm going to be yapping about it because, as you can tell, I do not shut up. I refuse. To stop talking.
It's really remarkable. I thought that there wasn't anyone who could talk more obnoxiously than me, though. I'm kidding. Guys, you've been listening. We've been going for a long time. If you're still here, thank you. But that about does it, guys. Thank you for making Locked On Padres your first listen every day. And now, guys, make Locked On MLB your second listen. Paul Francis Sullivan, but please call him Sully. Please. He's begging you. Call him Sully. He brings you his unique perspective on the major leagues, both past and present. It's free and available on all platforms. In terms of the future of this podcast, guys, I don't really know right now, to be perfectly honest with you. We'll probably be talking about Mike Shildt, who might be getting hired, might not be. I'll probably get more upset about the Tatis shoulder injury news. I don't know exactly, but hopefully you enjoyed today's episode of Baseball Economics and what have you. Baseball Economics 101. The course is offered.
We didn't even talk about the Padres manager search. What am I doing here? Hire Bruce Bochy.
You're more than welcome to be back on the podcast another time when something happens. I don't know. There's always going to be something.
Or when nothing happens and you need to fill an hour. That's what I'm here. I'm great for nothing happen. Let Mark just yap for an hour and a half.
But yeah, feel free to follow Mark and whatnot on Twitter and stuff, guys. And with that all being said, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast. As I said at the beginning, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Feel free to follow my account on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, or Locked On Padres at LO_Padres. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Locked On Padres. Really good stuff on there. You can see whatever shirt Mark was wearing. I didn't reveal that. I revealed my Slam Diego shirt, which might be the new bit that I do of the podcast from now on.
You know what's funny? I got this shirt I got this shirt in San Diego. This event was in San Diego.
Oh.
We won't say what it is because if you're listening, you gotta go over to YouTube.
Yeah, you gotta go check
it
it out. It's great. Let me tell you guys, great stuff. I wear mine because there's a criminal on this shirt. To be honest with you,
This shirt explains. If you see this shirt, it explains a lot of what I've talked about today, and even the how I've done
it. Definitely does. Yeah, it definitely does. But with that all being said, guys, until next time, stay safe and of course stay faithful, my Friar Faithful homies. Take care.